All right. Good morning, everyone. Good evening, based on some of the people on the list. Thank you for joining us on our webinar. If you're on this, you're probably on the wait list. So the purpose of this webinar is to really be as actionable as possible and answer as many questions as possible. So two asks. One, if you do have questions, we're going to have a Q&A session at the end. We'll talk about the agenda in just a moment. But in the control panel for this webinar, you should be able to type in a question. So as a question comes up, feel free to type that in, send that over to us, and then we'll pick from those and answer them at the end. Also, if you have any issues hearing us or seeing the screen, please type that into the chat section. Let us know. You can also, contact GoToWebinar. They can help you get kind of sorted out. But hopefully, everything's in working order. So, with that said, welcome again. We're going to talk a little bit about the waitlist today, and it's a scary situation. Well, there's not a lot of information out there. So, over the course of this webinar, we're going to cover four things. Right? We're going to talk a little bit about who we are. Effectively, who's on the call and where some of our information and credibility is coming from, right? Why should you listen to us? Then we're going to talk about what is the waitlist. And some of this information you may have seen online or you may have heard of, through other sources, but we're going to cover it because some people don't know. And even if you are pretty familiar with the process, you might learn something new along the way. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the waitlist is and level set on that. Then we're going to talk about how to get off the waitlist, and this is where we're going to spend the bulk of our time, really talking about figuring out what went wrong, how to address those things, the various parts of the puzzle that kind of fit together that you have to consider, and then we're going to end with Q&A, as I mentioned. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Eddie, and we're going to talk a little bit about who we are.
Great, thanks, Bhavik. So who are we? We've been advising our clients for a while now. We are an MBA admissions consulting firm with deep admissions experience and expertise with management consulting experience across a whole host of industries. And we really, truly enjoy going on the journey of the application process with each and every one of our clients. Our clients, people typically ask who our clients are. We've had the benefit of working with folks all around the world. We've had the pleasure of working with prospective students anywhere from folks who have started NGOs in India to entrepreneurs in Africa to bankers in Europe and even consultants here in the U.S. So we've truly had a global representation of our client base, and we have a truly diverse candidate pool of folks that we work with. So who's on the call today? You've already heard from Bhavik, who kicked off the call. He's the managing partner of Critical Square. Bhavik went to Booth for his MBA and has years of strategy consulting experience in industries such as consumer goods, finance, healthcare, industrial products, automotive, and many more. And I'm Eddie Hahn. I'm also a partner here at Critical Square, also from Booth. And my background is also in consulting, and I've covered industries in the life sciences, particularly in the pharmaceuticals, as well as the retail space, consumer goods, technology, and nonprofit. So you're probably wondering, with so many admissions consulting firms out in the landscape today, you're wondering sort of what sets us apart. So hopefully I can go through a little bit about our process, our methodology, and why it all works. So if you're on this call today, you've probably heard and sought advice from many different admissions consulting firms, and they'll probably discuss personalized strategies and unique frameworks and pitch those to you. But typically we've heard feedback and from our experience as well that it typically translates into more of a cookie-cutter approach. So what really sets us apart is that our firm revolves around the simple principle that every applicant is unique, and we truly believe that. We feel that we talk the talk in terms of truly investing the time to look, and we look forward to getting to know all of our clients and really spending the time to sit with each of them and get to really truly know their backgrounds. So for instance, today when we're faced with questions about the waitlist, we're really talking directly to us, right? The people who've done this, have gone through the process, and have had successful results. And on other components of the application process in which we help our clients, we start from scratch, really a blank piece of paper, working side by side with our clients to craft a compelling story. And like I mentioned, based on our model, we've had some really positive results and still continue to build this over time. And then finally, you'll notice by the end of our webinar today that we might not always tell you what you want to hear, but we're confident that what we do share with you is what you need to hear. So when we work with our clients, we believe in straight shooting. We have very high expectations of our clients, so we don't compromise on the quality of their application. And we've been known to challenge our clients every step of the way. But like I said, it's all for the same end goal in mind, getting that final acceptance letter.
So with the little sales spiel over, let's get into kind of the purpose behind today's webinar, right? What is the waitlist and how do you get off of it? So the waitlist can sometimes feel like a black hole, right? You have no idea where you're going. Every school approaches it differently. Every online source that you can read or every person who's gone through it has had a different experience, even more unique and different than individuals who applied, right? Everyone who applies to business school has a different journey through that process, and the waitlist just adds a whole other wrinkle. And it can be, terrifying. It can be confusing. It can be annoying, and we understand that. And a lot of this comes down to two main factors that we're going to talk about. One, a lack of information that's out there, right? There aren't a lot of sources that are credible in terms of telling you, and answering the questions that you have about the waitlist. And the other is figuring out how you specifically can navigate the waitlist, because the waitlist, we talk a lot about personalized applications, personalized strategies. The waitlist just takes that to a whole nother level. So why don't we start first, by talking a little bit about what the waitlist is.
Great. So while Bhavik said, while being on the waitlist may feel a bit nebulous and frustrating, the news isn't all that bad. Receiving a waitlist letter actually means that you're still in contention. But obviously, when you get that letter or response from the admissions committee, you have such high expectations, and anything short of that really seems like a disappointment. So we often find that students are a little bit on the downside, and then they forget that they're actually still in contention. So we ask that everyone keep that in mind. The admissions committee has reviewed your application, and they clearly believe that you have what it takes to make it at their institution as an MBA student. So just keep in mind that you're a viable candidate still in the mix. Now, on the other hand, there's likely a component of your application that is holding you back, but the good news is that there's still something that you can do about it.
Yeah. I mean, the worst thing that could have happened was a ding, right? I mean, it sounds like the waitlist is a terrible place to be, but it's not the best place to be, but it's not all that bad either. So one of the questions that we get all the time, and I'm not going to click to the next slide because it's kind of like the reveal, is what are my chances of getting off this waitlist, right? Now, every school out there publishes their incoming class profile, right? They talk about that median GMAT score, the average age, where their students come from, how many are international, what percentage are female. They tell you all of that about the incoming class, right? How many total applications did we get, and how many did we accept? Great. But when it comes to the waitlist, they publish nothing. And one of the main reasons behind that is the waitlist varies every year, right? A school can go from taking 0 people in one year to everyone off the waitlist the next. I mean, everyone is a bit of an exaggeration, but it's to illustrate a point. So no school publishes this. So what we've done over the last few years, as we've talked to admissions directors and admissions committees, is try to get at this nebulous answer. And the answer you're going to get is perhaps a bit nebulous, but it's less nebulous. On average, the waitlist chances are about 10 to 20%, and they can range from 0 to more than 50%. And it depends a lot on the school and what their current application pool looks like for that year. But there are also some other factors that can play in, right? So, for example, and by the way, these are all general levers, right? I mean, how they apply to you specifically can vary. But generally, what we've found is if you're international, that can sometimes be a little bit more difficult to get off the waitlist. But if you were interviewed, right, so you can be put on the waitlist at 2 different points, right? You can be put on the waitlist before being invited to interview or after. And if you've been interviewed, your chances go up, right? The school obviously thought you were interesting enough to invest the time and money and resources to interview you, and so they're very vested in you, and then they're just trying to get something fixed before they kind of make that final decision. So being interviewed is a great great indication. Generally, if you're male, you have a little bit less of an advantage. But on the flip side, if you're unique, that can really help. And what do we mean by unique, right? I mean, everyone's unique, right? As everyone's mothers tell them, you're all special. But some people are a bit more special than others. And you know, if you come from, if you're a CPA for PwC, you know, you can have some great work experience, you know, and really have a strong candidacy. But at the end of the day, you're not that different from the next CPA from PwC. But if you are a 3-time gold medalist in the Olympics, well, that's pretty cool, right? So being unique can definitely help. And if you add diversity to the class, that can help as well. And diversity doesn't necessarily mean are you an underrepresented minority. Diversity can also mean if you come from a very uncharacteristic background, etc. So those kinds of things can kind of bump up your chances. So short answer, about 10 to 20%. The unfortunately longer answer is it doesn't quite apply to everyone the same way. So now that we're all level set a bit on what the waitlist is, what the odds are, which I hope is an answer to a lot of your questions, we're going to talk now and spend the majority of our time really getting into how to get off this waitlist.
So how to get off the waitlist? You know, it's first viable to mention that the waitlist process favors those who are prepared and truly proactive. Surely you already know that. But now it's time to think. There are typically a few things that candidates can think about, but the first step is to really figure out what type of waitlist that you're on. So we've broken it down into 3 categories. You know, first, there's schools that are pretty clear-cut in that they have all the information they need, and that's what they tell you, that you shouldn't worry about sending them any additional updates, and they sort of ended at that. Then there's a second category where programs who won't necessarily give you direct feedback, but it's fairly clear that you should reiterate your commitment to their school and demonstrate that you're a strong fit for their school by sharing progress of what's changed since the first time you applied. And then finally, there are schools who are rather open, right? They'll share feedback straight on. They'll tell you exactly what you should be working on, and now it's time for you to execute. But regardless of the type, you know, obviously, if it's a school that you're interested in, step 1 is opting in. So that takes us to the next question of how often you should communicate. So here it's critical that you're strategic, right? You know, oftentimes folks just want to jump on the opportunity to communicate back and share things as they come through. But you really want to take a moment to really plan your steps here. You want to properly manage the amount of information and the cadence in which you communicate to the admissions committee. As you progress in both your professional career, maybe you got promoted, or there's in your extracurricular activities, there's a volunteer initiative that got some new and exciting results. You want to be able to sort of take a step back and parse out these updates and strike the proper balance of how much you share in your first update, right? You want to make sure that you don't hold the critical information too close to the chest, but also you don't want to give away everything in your first update, as you don't necessarily know how long you'll be on the wait list, right? And you want to be able to keep that open line of communication. So based on our conversations with admissions committee members and experience with our clients, communicating with your AdCom contact every 3 to 4 weeks is really the sweet spot and the area that we recommend. You really want to try to stick to this rule of thumb. Any more than this is likely too much and too burdensome to the admissions committee, and any less, you become out of sight, out of mind.
All right. So you know, step 1, figure out what kind of wait list you're on. Step 2, now you know how often you should communicate. And it's kind of like a chess game, right? You really need to think a couple of steps ahead. As Eddie mentioned, you don't know how long you'll be on this. You could be on this until they review round 2 applications. You could be on this until the day before classes start. And you know, one thing that we'd really like to highlight here is don't just send an update for the sake of sending an update, right? Make sure your update contains meaningful information. You know, something that I think a lot of applicants can sometimes tend to forget is admissions committees are really busy. And you know, yes, they commit to the waitlist, and the waitlist is an important aspect of the process for both you and them. But sending, you know, the waitlist general email or your waitlist contact excessive amounts of updates or fluffy updates or meaningless updates is probably not going to get you remembered in the best of lights, right? So once you've kind of set your strategy, figured out what this roadmap looks like, the next step is figuring out what you specifically need to fix, right? How do you figure out what went wrong with your application? And part of this is detective work. Part of this is being honest with yourself. And whether that's talking to an admissions consultant or whether that's talking to someone in your personal network or talking to an alumni, whatever it is, you need an external perspective in this case for someone to call you out, right? Be like, hey, John, your essay here is vague. It's not very good. I don't get what you're trying to say. Or, your resume, I don't really get what you're doing, or I don't get the impact. Or maybe your recommendations are weak. Or whatever that might be, you need. We would both, Eddie and I would both really urge everyone on this call to get that external perspective, wherever it comes from, because you're just simply too close to the process. You don't. It's difficult to step back and say, hey, this essay I spent nights and weekends and sweat over isn't very good. You're not going to be the person who tells yourself that, right? So you really need to figure out. What went wrong, and sometimes getting that external perspective is perfect. But as you look at your application, there are 5 pieces to the puzzle that you should be looking at. And we're going to talk about each of them. We're going to stay on the slide for a while now, but we're going to talk about each of these in significant detail. Your application is generally a component of, obviously, your test scores and your academics, which are more statistics-based, as well as kind of your letters of support, your demonstrated passion and interest, as well as your story and goals. And each of these, the reason we have this rather kitschy puzzle graphic is they do all fit together, right? If you miss one, the puzzle simply isn't complete. Or if one of them is weaker, it puts an inordinate amount of pressure on the other pieces. And if those pieces aren't strong enough to carry that pressure, you're in a bit of a, you're going to be in a bit of a tight spot. So let's start with the easy one first. Let's start with test scores. We have a series of videos. If you go to our website, we have a section called Common Questions, Awesome Answers. One of the most common questions we get is, should I retake the GMAT? And test scores can really hold you back. And I hate to be that person on this webinar to say that. We've seen in the last few years, and I think this coming year will be no different, we've seen kind of an arms race in test scores at top schools. For example, our hypothesis is, going into last summer, the GMAT score, the median GMAT score at Duke was about 690. We honestly think that's going to, eke up a bit to maybe the 695, 700 range this coming year, right? Same thing with Ross. Ross published statistics about their round 1 applications and said that not only were the applications up 33%, the median GMAT of those applicants was up statistically significantly as well. Test scores matter, right? To give you guys another data point, so we're AIGAC certified, which is a global organization for admissions consultants, and they did a survey last year. It's already 2015, right? So back in 2014, and they spoke to 20, 25 of the top admissions directors out there, and they said, hey, why do you ding applicants? And the number 1 reason was the GMAT. The number 2 reason was your GPA. So, I know we've said it, other people say it, it's true to a certain degree. The GMAT is really only one part of the puzzle. But it's a really important part of the puzzle. And a lot of times schools will, that'll be what's holding you back, right? So if it is a test score, so if it's your GMAT, or perhaps you took the GRE, or if you're international, maybe you took your TOEFL, if there is a GMAT that is low for your applicant pool, and if you're wondering what I mean by applicant pool, I strongly urge you to go check out those videos. We talk about that in detail. Not just compared to the median, but compared to your applicant pool. If you're low, that's something that the school's probably wanting you to fix, right? Let's go back to that CPA from PwC example again, right? If you're a CPA at Price Waterhouse and you've got 680 and you're applying to a school with a median score of a 720, and there was another CPA from Price Waterhouse that got a 720, right on the nose, they've eked you out, right? And if you're lucky enough at that point to be put on the wait list because they think there's something different between you and them, you can guarantee that test score is, a couple of standard deviations off that median. So the wait list is a perfect time to put in place a plan to retake that test, whatever test that is. And the backup to that is, even if you don't get off the wait list and you have to retry and apply in the following year, you now have potentially a stronger test score, and that'll help. So being proactive in this case is important. So moving on to the bottom left, academics, right? As I mentioned from that survey, right, the second main reason was your GPA. You're applying to business school. They want to know if you can, succeed. It's a business school program, grade non-disclosure or not, is not easy, right? It's difficult. It's rigorous. You hit the ground running. 2 years go by a lot faster than you think. And if the school doesn't believe that you'll be able to keep up or you'll be able to add academic value, I mean, they're an academic institution first and foremost, right? So your academics are a really big deal. And academics can be highlighted as a source of issue for a few different reasons. One, you just have an overall low GPA. That's problem number one, right? Problem number two is maybe you have a pretty good GPA, but you didn't take any quantitative courses or you don't have a business background. Sometimes that can make things difficult for an MBA student, right? If you have a communications degree and then you worked in PR and you've never taken a stats course or a calc course or accounting course in your life, you're going to have a bit of an issue, and that's how the schools are going to see it. And then lastly, if you didn't go to a fantastic institution, right? I mean, there's tier 1 institutions, there are target feeder institutions. These are schools that are rigorous to get into, have a methodology in place that schools value. They teach people how to learn, not just teach them information. And then you have a bunch of other schools below that. Now, you can't change that aspect of your hand. You can't change that card, but you can be proactive. And so a low GPA or not having quant courses is not something you can't correct. And being on the wait list is a perfect time to do that, right? So there are a couple of different ways to go about, for one, if you are on the wait list and you have time and you have access, extension courses, most of them are online. UCLA, Berkeley, Stern, if you're in the New York area, I'll offer them, are a fantastic way to build up an alternative transcript. And once again, if you go to, as I mentioned with the Common Questions, Awesome Answers videos, we have one on building an alternative transcript as well. But it can be a great way to show that you're committed. It can be a great way to show the admissions committee, look, I get that I don't have the quant background that you're looking for, or I have lower grades than you might want, but here I'm doing something about it. I'm being proactive. We had a client in round one who applied to Booth, who got an $80,000 fellowship, but the reason I bring up this example is he had a 2.3 GPA. But what set him apart, aside from kind of his background, his profession, etc., was he did well on his tests, and he had taken 4 extension courses and gotten A's and A pluses, right? And putting a story around that, saying, hey, I know I didn't do well in college, but here's all the stuff that I've done since, and here's how seriously I'm taking it, just paints such a good picture, right? It's perseverance and it's drive at its finest. And sometimes being on the wait list requires that same perseverance and drive. It's something that you probably should have done before you applied, but they're giving you a chance to potentially fix it now. So now let's move over to, and by the way, we're starting to get a couple of really good questions. We're monitoring it over here, so definitely send in some more, and we'll try to get those answered. the other one to consider is the support. And if you think about the admissions committee's task, it's pretty difficult, right? They're looking at your test scores and your academics, things you can't change, or things that are fixed, rather. They're looking at your essays, which are self-provided, and they're looking at your letters of recommendation, which are their only objective, which is the only objective source of information that they have. Well, it's mildly subjective, but it's not you providing it. Well, hopefully you didn't write your own recommendation letters. Letters of recommendation can play a really pivotal role in setting applications apart. I think one of the things that a lot of applicants do is they'll gloss over the letters of recommendation. Either they won't prep their recommenders, they won't select them properly, they won't impress upon them the importance of the process, or they won't, provide feedback. Whatever it is, we've seen some pretty bad recommendation letters. Either because it was the wrong person writing it or it was just written poorly. A lot of recommenders, if you're in consulting or banking, you probably have access to recommenders who have written business school recommendations before. But if you haven't, or if you don't have access to those people, chances are your recommenders have never written a top business school recommendation letter in their life. And that can really do you harm, right? When they're looking to figure out what about you is good and what needs to be developed, they're looking for an honest picture from somebody who knows you, and that's why they ask for these recommendation letters. They're not asking just because they want to make the process more difficult, right? They need data. So, if, for example, you look at your recommendation letters, you go, all right, you know what? Of the two, this one was terrible. I need to fix this. I need to get somebody else. I need to have them write another letter of recommendation. That's something you really need to do. Or if you have access to alumni at that school, maybe they'll write you a letter of support instead. And they can address some of the things that you might have found in your, in your assessment. So for example, let's say you think your quant is low. Then you can say, hey, recommender 3, do you mind talking a little bit about my quantitative abilities? And you can attack it from multiple perspectives. Lastly, passion and interest. A lot of people research online. That's it. They don't do anything beyond that, right? They look at rankings, they look at websites, and they're like, yeah, I'm going to apply here. And that, schools don't want that, right? They want to know you're serious. And one of the best ways to show you're serious is to go visit. If you haven't visited, the waitlist is the time to go do that. If you're international, I get it. It's expensive. It takes a lot of time. But if you're serious, you need to invest, right? You need to invest in that process. Because if there are 4 people from India on the wait list and you were the only one who booked a ticket and flew over there and sat down with them, they'll remember that, right? When it comes to making a decision, they'll know you're serious. And lastly, your goals and your story. Maybe your essays weren't very well articulated, or maybe your story didn't make any sense, right? Maybe your goals were unrealistic. The wait list is a time where they're looking for a little bit more insight and a little bit more introspection to say, hey, let me explain what I meant, or I've evolved my thought process, or maybe you researched your goals extensively, but you didn't have enough space to really explain how it would work. You can talk a little bit more about that as well. So those are the 5 major components, and like I said, every waitlist applicant is different, right? Everyone has a different area of weakness as they go into this process and how they want to approach it, which leads us to the next slide, which is how do you really stand out? So the first thing is follow the directions. You really have to follow the directions. If they say they want it, in a specific format, or they want it to a specific website or email address, send it there. Don't go outside the lines too much. But at the same time, be creative, right? They've defined the sandbox. They've set up the rules. And inside that sandbox, you can do whatever you want. Not everything has to be an essay, right? Like if you applied to, let's say, Boost and you didn't do the PowerPoint, now's a great time to do the PowerPoint. Or maybe you applied to Duke and they asked you for those 25 random things about you, and you wanted to show them something more professional, then maybe a letter is the right way to go. There's really no right answer, but they don't just bore them either, right? So it's really important to both follow the directions and be creative. And if you do those two things together, it's going to be in one of those positions where you get to flex your creative muscle and show that you can think outside the box and you can be aggressive, but that you're still professional, right? You're still applying to business school. You're professional. Everything about this needs to be crisp. It needs to be succinct. It needs to be concise. And you need to communicate really, really well. You're selling yourself, right? You're the business and you're selling yourself to this business school. So you need to do it, think of it that way. Think of how you're going to pitch kind of a wary investor. So that is kind of the end of the slides. And so we're going to switch over to the Q&A session. And right now we have a pretty good list of questions, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. But if you have one, send it over, and we'll go through. So the first question, let me scroll up. Why are international applicants on the waitlist at a disadvantage? Does this not help the diversity of the class? So that's a great question. And as I mentioned, those were kind of general buckets. Being international can be great. And diversity, you're absolutely correct, is important to the class, right? You don't want a bunch of American-born consultants running around, right? You want people from different walks of life in different parts of the world doing different things, right? That's the strength. And not only does that help the diversity of the class, it helps the network. Your network is now in more places doing more cool things. The problem with being an international student is that it doesn't apply to the entire international community equally. So, for example, if you're from Estonia and you're on the wait list, the international component may not work against you, right? There aren't a bunch of Estonians applying. But if you're from China, you can bet yourself that you're not the only Chinese person on that wait list. And so when you fall into perhaps an overrepresented category and you're by being international, it's a disadvantage for the wait list, the same reason that's a disadvantage in regular admissions, right? If your school says, hey, we accept 15% of those people, on average, that number is about half that for specifically Indian and Asian applicants. And that continues into the wait list. So that's a great question. Yes, diversity is fantastic, and schools want diversity. But it becomes a question of, now that you're on the wait list, how do you compare it? If there are other people who are at least similar or from the same country, or if the slots are being filled, for the class that they're trying to build, that can sometimes, sometimes work against you. Not always, but sometimes. Here's another one. All right, so it says, if I get an admit from another school, my second choice school, can I request the school where I am waitlisted after being interviewed, which is their first choice, to provide an update on my application before the deposit deadline for the other one? That's a good question. And we kind of abide by the if you don't ask, you'll never get it component. But it has to be in a realistic time, right? Which is essentially if they put you on the wait list and the deposit deadline is within a few weeks, because some schools, for example, will release decisions at different times and have different deadlines, then that's too soon. But if it's been a month or 2 months and you're saying, hey guys, I was accepted to this school in middle of December, their deposit deadline is in the middle of February, I've sent you an update or two, depending on when that is, I would love to come to your program. I've done all these things. I'm really passionate about it, but I've got this deposit deadline. That's definitely something you can explore, and that's something certain clients have done successfully, and in certain cases the admissions committees have come back and they've said, no, if you choose to pay the deposit, let us know and we'll take you off. But in neither case has the response been negative in tone. Right? They're open to it. They understand that this wasn't the only program you applied to. The other component is do you not do that, pay the deposit, and view that as a sunk cost? Some people do that as well, right? Which is, you put the money down, you don't mention it to the other program, it doesn't apply as much pressure as you think, and then continue to stay on the wait list and see what happens. And then if that wait list decision comes through, you view that $2,000, $3,000, whatever, as a sunk cost, and you go to your top ranked school. That's another option. That has a little bit more to do with your risk profile, as well as kind of just, it's expensive, right? I mean, not everyone wants to write off $3,000, but when you're looking at $150,000 in tuition, it can, if you keep it relative, it can be a good way to kind of think about it. The next one. When is the most likely time to be taken off the wait list? When round 1 deposits are due? When round 2 interview invites go out? That's a wonderful question. If you've been placed on the wait list in round 1, generally what they're trying to do is they say, look, you're interesting, and this is to the extent that there's something that you need to fix and you fix it. They want to see what the rest of the application pool is going to look like before they make a decision. And so as as round 2 invites go out for interviews, that can be a good time when they start considering all of the people on the wait list as well as the new round 2 applicants and trying to do it that way. So you can definitely expect to hear then. If you've already been interviewed, that might be too soon, right? At that point, they need to wait until kind of the round 2 interviews are done as well. But if you haven't been interviewed and you're on the wait list, then they might look at the round 2 total applicant pool and go, you know what, let's invite this person back to interview. We haven't done that yet. Sometimes, you can hear back much later, right? If you're flexible and you stay on the wait list, it's kind of an attrition game, right? If you hang on for the longest, and by the time they have a slot open and there's only 8 people left on it, your chances go up significantly. So, around the round 2 decision deadlines is a really good kind of first wave of waitlist accepts. If you're on the round 2 waitlist, then it becomes a bit more ad hoc, right? Because round 3 or round 4, depending on the school, is a bit more of a gap filling game than the fundamental round 1s and round 2s. Here's a question. What is the process of sending an additional recommendation to the admissions committee? Do I email it or should the recommender send it directly? This is a school-specific question. Some schools will want, so for example, if you're doing a letter of support, for example, that person can email the school directly. If you're doing a letter of recommendation, some schools will allow you to submit that via the online channel. They might want to continue that. Some schools are a little bit more flexible and they can say, no, you know what, that's fine. You can just, as long as the contact details are there and we can verify it, you can put it in a packet and make it look pretty. Now, obviously, the problem with that is it's not as a sealed envelope situation as when you did the application itself, but the wait list is a bit different. And so what I would say, frustratingly I know, is contact the school and say, hey, guys, I have a quick question. By the way, one thing I didn't mention yet is before you send any email question to the admissions committee, make sure you read their website and their blog extensively. Because if you haven't and you send them a question that is clearly in the directions, it's annoying, right? Like I said, they're busy, they don't have a lot of time, and they don't want to answer questions they just spent time typing up on a website. But if you don't find it there, if they haven't posted it, send them a note. Be like, hey, I would like to send another letter of recommendation. Do you have a process that you'd prefer? And if so, let me know. I'm happy to abide by it. All right, so let's see. Okay, so here's a good one actually. What if I ask them if there is anything I can do and they don't answer me back? What should I do? Okay, so as Eddie mentioned, there was the red light schools, the yellow light schools, and the green light schools. whether it's a green light school or a yellow light school, you should always ask for feedback. If they don't respond, bust out that Sherlock Holmes hat, get that magnifying glass, and figure out what you can work on by yourself, right? Because if you don't get feedback, you shouldn't wait, right? You should be working concurrently. You should be working in parallel. You should be figuring out what you can do. Maybe they just haven't gotten to your email, and maybe they'll get back to you eventually, or maybe they'll never get back to you, in which case they want you to figure it out. And that's something where, as we mentioned, this is a process that favors the prepared and the proactive. If you go out asking for answers and they don't provide them, and you can't go figure out that answer on your own, that's probably a signal to the business school you don't want to send. So if they haven't responded, in a reasonable time, a week and a half, 2 weeks, you can always follow up. Be like, hey, just wanted to follow up on this note below. I'm still very passionate, and I've been working on some things on my own before I send an update to the admissions committee, but I just wanted to double check. And if they still don't respond, let it go, right? And work on your own stuff. All right, okay? So here's one that's a little bit off the beaten path. Nearly all of my 5 years of work experience is entrepreneurial. First generation family business, less than $1 million in US dollars in revenue. My real short-term goals are to return to my business in India. I thought that taking a job after my MBA for a few years might ease the loan repayment. Yeah, that's for sure. So I wrote about doing a job in the short term. I got waitlisted at 2 schools, pretty well known for entrepreneurship, and I had pretty good interviews. Do you think I played it too safe and messed up my career goals? Can I do something about it now to get off the wait list? So I'll try to answer that as best as I can without actually seeing your application and your goals. It really depends on what you wanted to do in the short term, right? So yes, I get it. You're from India. Tuition isn't in rupees, so it's expensive, and you do need to work here for a few years, right, to pay it back. Otherwise, the math will never work out. But if your longer-term goal is to go back to this company that you have in India, then your short-term goals have to be more complex and deep than to just say, hey, I need the money, right? So if that was the level of specificity that you achieved in your essay, then this is a great time to say, hey, admissions committee, I know I said I wanted to work for the short term in the U.S. I wanted to expand a little bit on that and talk about why this particular function and industry and how I see that playing into my longer term goals. Because if the admissions committee is viewing your short and long term goals as disjointed, that's a bad business plan, right? That's a bad personal business plan. So you don't want to be in a position where you put forward a story that doesn't fit together. If you have put forward a story that doesn't fit together already, and by that I mean you've been specific, you can go back and say you can try to damage control that as much as possible. But chances are, based on what we've seen, chances are you weren't that specific to begin with, which in this case is actually a blessing in disguise, right? Because you can expand on that. But the goal here is really to say, look, I'm at A. I want to come to your school. That's point B. I've got C after your school, and then I want to get to D. And this is how A, B, and C, and D all fit together. And if you can't paint that picture in a realistic and believable way, you've probably got a bigger problem in terms of your goals. All right. Does it make sense to mention something you're currently doing, not done yet? For example, taking up a course in line with your goals before actually completing it. Absolutely, right? And this comes up a lot, especially when people have, for example, let's say low quant scores, right? They're taking an additional course. This one's perfect because they'll in their first update they'll say, hey, I registered for statistics or whatever that might be. And I recognize that my quant components are a bit low. And then in their second update, they'll say, hey, the statistic course wrapped up. I got an A, etc. Or I'm taking this certification. And then in the second update, you can talk a little bit about, how that process went, what you learned, why, what you've got coming up next. But you can absolutely talk about things in progress, projects at work that are in progress, volunteer efforts that are in progress. Just because they're not completed and you can't talk about them in the past tense does not mean, that you can't show them off. All right, let's see what's next. Does a round 1 waitlisted applicant have a better chance than a round 2 waitlisted applicant? Yes and no. Yes, in that they entered the process a little bit earlier. They've had a little bit more time to update work on their application, update the admissions committee on changes. So yes, in that regard. But if the round 1 waitlist applicant is still on the waitlist at the same time the round 2 waitlist applicant is, then no. Then they're on the same footing at that point. The benefit that the round 1 applicant has is that they get a chance to be compared to the round 2 applicant pool. The round 2 applicant doesn't have that opportunity with round 3 because round 3 is going to be smaller. There are fewer seats on the bus. It's simply not something, where they can kind of slip in again. They obviously consider the waitlist for every round after you're waitlisted, but round 3, round 4 is always a bit more difficult, right? So round 1 has a bit of an advantage in terms of the process and the timing. I wouldn't necessarily say they are necessarily better waitlist candidates. They simply have more time to be considered. Can I send some follow-up questions via email? Yes, absolutely. On your screen right now is our email address, so feel free to do that. If you want to chat either about the waitlist or if you want to talk about what the process might look like for next year, you can go to our website, which is criticalsquare.com, sign up for a consultation. If you need a hand with your waitlist, materials, we have a service for that, and we have 2 price points. We understand this is an expensive process, so welcome you to check that out. But yes, questions are welcome. Feel free to send them our way. All right. Let's see. Okay. Can activities and awards received in schools mentioned in extracurricular activities for graduate applicants in business schools? Hold on, let me reread that. I believe this question is asking if you received any awards in undergrad, in which case, yes, you can mention those. You have to do so in moderation, obviously, and you have to make sure that they're meaningful and value add. You don't want to just list every award and academic recognition you ever got, but if it's meaningful and it was significant, absolutely talk about that. For the purpose of fairness, doesn't the admissions committee view the additional material with less importance? Interesting question. A bit difficult to respond to in that they're not exactly an apples-to-apples comparison. So, they're not viewing your additional material as, in par with someone else's application, right? They have your application for that. They're looking, the purpose of waitlist materials is different. The purpose of waitlist materials is to update them and fill in gaps. So it's really just to strengthen your application versus replace it. So yes, they don't view it the same way, but they're not looking to either. So it's I hope that kind of answers your question. If it doesn't, type another one. Is it possible to get a scholarship if you were on the waitlist? Definitely possible, and it's happened. Does it happen a lot? No. Depends on when you get off the waitlist, right? A lot of schools have merit scholarship aid deadlines. So if you get off the waitlist, before that deadline, you are definitely in consideration. Does it happen a lot? Not a ton, right? If you were a solid choice for merit-based aid, chances are you probably didn't find yourself on the wait list, but it has happened in the past. Oh, okay. So this is a great question, actually. It's a good clarification. You mentioned 3 to 4 weeks as the sweet spot for communication. Is that the timeline for my communications or all communications related to me? Examples from current students, alumni. Letters of support can go in kind of whenever, but they should tie into your overarching waitlist strategy. So you don't want, letters of support going in randomly. So to that point, I would say, plus or minus a week from when you want to communicate. Maybe for your first communication, you're going to have an alumni send a letter of support. Maybe for your second, you're going to have a student send a letter of support. Whatever that might be, it needs to tie in to your overarching strategy. Otherwise, they're going to get updates all over the place, and then that's just not going to be good in terms of optics. Can I send in an updated resume, say after 3 months of being on the wait list, encompassing all the updated information I had sent in? Yes, you can. You can always send in an updated resume if you want. But the waitlist packet can generally be better utilized as a as a written document in terms of like an essay or a letter of update. A resume, it's difficult for most people. For most resumes we've seen, it's difficult for most people to parse out their impact and communicate that effectively anyway. So you're not necessarily convincing the admissions committee if your first resume wasn't that great in the first place. So I would suggest sticking more to talking about recent accomplishments and achievements in a different format than just sending a resume and asking them to compare the two versions to figure out what changed. Hold on. So this is an interesting one. My recommender, who is an active alumnus, got an email asking him about me being put on the wait list. Should I ask my recommender to reply back asking for additional information? What can I do to bolster that application? Yeah, absolutely. If they're active and they strongly believe in your candidacy, yeah, absolutely do that. It can't hurt. The worst they can say is no. So we've got time for a few more questions. Before we go, I'll continue to answer questions, but Eddie and I wanted to thank you all for joining today, taking time out of your day, your evening, whatever that might be, to join us today. Hopefully it was helpful. Hopefully you walk away from this conversation or this webinar with a better understanding of both the waitlist and kind of how you fit into it and how you can do more with it. And as I mentioned, if you need a hand with that, shoot over to our website. We have a waitlist service. It's really effective. It's really thorough, and we'll call you out. We'll call you out where you need to be called out. And we're pretty proud of making our clients sweat. All right, so all right. Okay, so this is a good question. How does the AdCom positively or negatively view a slight change in your short-term goals, something which would probably match the target school's recruiting numbers? I don't know exactly what you mean by recruiting numbers, but if you're talking about recruiting capabilities, then maybe. Do not tailor your goals ever to match with what a school is good at. That is a bad idea. If you can tailor it to be more specific to you, to be more applicable to you, then yes. But don't simply say, hey, I kind of wanted to do consulting and they seem to be good at this particular type of consulting, so I'm going to do that. Don't, that's not the way to shape up those career goals. Somebody said, thank you so much. You're very welcome. We appreciate that. So, all right, that's a difficult question to answer in this webinar. I had submitted my application with the 690 and recently got a GRE score. Would this help in my application in any way? Given that conversion, not really. However, if you did dismally on the GMAT quant section and you did better on the GRE quant section, then maybe that could help. But score to score, that's not like a marked improvement. So, if it's not going to, wow the admissions committee in that way from a stats perspective, I would say no. Yeah, thanks for the awesome presentation. Thank you again, appreciate it. All right. Somebody's on here from at 2 a.m. I appreciate you staying up. Oh, this is a good one, and we'll end on this. I've heard that it's a taboo to communicate that XYZ school is my top choice during the general application. Does that apply for waitlist as well? If you have a secondary choice that you're locked into, so for example, there was that that individual who asked that question earlier, where they're into their second choice, but they're trying to get into their top choice, then yes, you should mention, be like, hey, I'm serious, I'm visiting, this is awesome. If you let me in, I'm accepting, I'm walking away from that deposit. Don't tell them about the deposit, but I'm guaranteed to say yes. You should absolutely mention passion, right? They're not looking to let people off the wait list, because you have to understand a lot of people stay on the wait list simply because, it was an email and they clicked the link and it said, do you want to opt in? They were like, yeah, sure, why not, right? So anything you can do to show them that you're really, really serious about getting off this wait list is important, and showing them that they're your first choice is important. So telling them is one thing, showing them is another, right? So as I mentioned, if you're on the wait list at HBS and you really, really want to go to HBS and you're in London, fly over the pond, go to Cambridge, chat with them, right? It's money, it's an investment, but if you're serious and they are your top choice, you should go, right? So, once again, thank you all for coming. There's a question on here about if there was a recording. Yes, there is a recording. We'll put it up on our website. And I think GMAT Club's going to put it up as well. But as we mentioned, if you have any questions, if you want to chat with us, shoot us a note. We are happy to chat. You'll talk with either myself, Eddie, or John, and we'll get you squared away. We'll answer any more questions you have. But we really appreciate it, guys. For those of you who are up late,